Good afternoon, and welcome to the first Mondays at Beinecke Gallery Talk online of this new year, 2022. I am Michael Moran, Director of Communications at the Beinecke Library. We in the library are especially grateful today to our colleagues at the Gilder Lehrman Center for the Study of Slavery, Resistance, and Abolition for their co-sponsorship of this program, as we are grateful all the time for their partnership in so many essential endeavors on campus, in New Haven and beyond. We wish you the best on this 2022 Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. Thank you for taking the time this afternoon if you're in the New Haven time zone, this evening if you're in Ghana, or wherever you are, for joining us today as we all collectively strive to make this holiday one of active engagement of the past, in the present, for the future. Today and every day, we at Yale acknowledge that Indigenous peoples and nations, including the Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill Paugussett, Niantic, Quinnipiac, and other Algonquian-speaking peoples have stewarded through generations the lands and waterways of what is now the state of Connecticut. Today and every day, we honor and respect the enduring relationship that exists between these peoples and nations and this land. Today and every day, let us also hear and heed the voices and stories of generations past and present who have fought against racism, white supremacy, state violence, and systems of oppression, and who have fought for liberation, joy, and freedom. Those voices and stories certainly include the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose living legacy we celebrate today and honor every day. For many years, we have marked this holiday in the Beinecke Library with a special program in the reading room, featuring materials from the collections that document the Black freedom struggle in America. Materials especially from the James Weldon Johnson Memorial Collection of African American Arts and Letters. Hundreds and hundreds of neighbors from throughout New Haven and the Yale campus would come to the physical library each Martin Luther King holiday and interact with the history that's made tangible through the collections. We pray that we will be able to renew this tradition on site next year, and we look forward to reopening the library to public visitors as soon as public health conditions permit. The last time we had a King Day celebration on site was in January 2020. It was a very cold day, but we were blessed to have today's speaker, Kwame Akoto-Bamfo, with us in person in New Haven to give a presentation on campus in the library that day. I first met Kwame 5 years ago at a truly epic installation he had at the Kwame Nkrumah Memorial in Accra, Ghana, on the occasion of the 60th anniversary of the independence of his country, Ghana. I have been with him in Ghana numerous times since then and have been blessed to host him twice in New Haven. Kwame's practice is a dynamic one of art making, place making, and institution building. His art connects audiences with the past. His art connects audiences across the Atlantic and throughout the diaspora. And his art connects the past with the present. His work crosses boundaries. His work bridges boundaries of time, of geography, of culture, of media. Kwame Akoto-Bamfo is an artist, an archivist, an activist, all at once and all together. As you would know from the information and the postings for this event, in 2015, he won Ghana's top prize for contemporary art. He is a graduate of KNUST in Kumasi, Ghana. Kwame is the founder of the Nchinchim Museum in Ada in Ghana where I was most recently with him in August to celebrate its ongoing expansion. He also has an Inchinchim installation that stands at the entrance of our nation's National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama. Opened in 2018 by the Equal Justice Initiative, it is the first memorial dedicated to the legacy of enslaved Black people, people terrorized by lynching, African Americans humiliated by racial segregation and Jim Crow, and people of color burdened with contemporary presumptions of guilt and police violence. Kwame has received a number of subsequent commissions from Brian Stevenson and EJI since then. And in 2020, Kwame's Blank Slate Monument toured throughout the US, beginning in Louisville, going to Detroit, Chicago, New York City, and to the King Center in Atlanta. He was at the King Center on August 27th of last year, the eve of the anniversary of the historic 1963 March on Washington. Bernice King, the youngest child of Coretta Scott King and Martin Luther King, and the CEO of the King Center, joined with Kwame for the unveiling of his work at its Atlanta stop back in August of last year. Bernice King said at the dedication, speaking of Kwame and of his work, quote, "Art has a way of reaching our sensibility and awakening our humanity. It is an honor and privilege to have our dear friend back with us virtually from Ghana for our 2022 MLK Day commemoration. Kwame, the screen is yours."
Thank you, Michael. And it's truly an honor to be back, even though it's only virtual. It's truly an honor to be back with you at Yale and to share my experience since my last talk, which was on survivor semiotics and how I was using, and I still am using art to communicate and to contribute to dialogue in our communities. Today's talk will be a follow-up. Without much ado, I will just share my screen. Today's talk will be a follow-up, but then it's also going to be independent and it's going to stand alone, and it's going to hopefully make sense by itself. So building restorative justice across the African diaspora. It's a really, it's something that comes close to heart looking at this subject. And last year, my own talk doing survivor semiotics had me researching even more about Dr. Martin Luther King than I've ever had, because I wanted to have some facts right. And I was truly inspired. I looked at his methods, and it dawned on me how restorative the act of marching is. And even though I didn't ever meet him in person, it was an honor to meet his descendant last year in Atlanta at the King Center. So I'm just showing you this slide because it was a moment that I felt connected to someone who has been so inspiring to my practice. My objectives for today is to share my thoughts, my inspiration, experience, and everything that has inspired my work so far, everything that has inspired the direction that I have come from and where I'm going to, and also to inspire a call to action, because my work is never complete without the participation of you, everybody who's watching, and it's not complete without the participation from people of the world, people who care about racial equality, people who care about eradication of racism from our communities and our societies. So how did this start? Last year I was on a tour throughout the US. It was continuous actually. It's something that it was a tour that was interrupted by COVID, so it ended up slipping into 2021. And it began when I, through dialogue, looking for people spawn of my own ilk, I would say, people who are in the direction, people who are moved and inspired by healing and dialogue in our societies, people like Brian Stevenson, people who want to do away with the legacies of slavery. This work has been meeting so many people across the diaspora, and my work has always tried to draw a link between Ghana, where I find myself, where I grew up, where I've grown up, where I had been since I was learning about my brothers and sisters in the diaspora. And people reach out to me all the time about similar problems that they are facing in their communities. So it wasn't surprising when some friends reached out to me and say, hey, what can we do to contribute to all these Confederate monuments that we find in the US? I haven't been inspired by the work of Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. I decided to come up with a non-violent way. I wanted it to be point blank. I wanted it to be for the people, by the people, but I also wanted it to be a non-violent protest, something that will last really long, and something that will kick back without starting violence. So we started by having a private view. I invited the African American Association of Ghana, the Caribbean Association, as many Black British that I could find, and then some academics from various Ghanaian universities, as well as my immediate patrons, that is the Nohale Adan community, to sort of try it out and then find out how this work, the blank slate monuments, could impact the community, what people's reactions will be. And if you can see from this screen, immediately it came to us, it dawned on us how powerful and raw it can be. And at the same time, how, if not controlled, how easily it can get out of control, because people had a lot to say, and given the opportunity, people felt like venting, people felt constricted, people felt in bondage. People had so much to say, and you can't really put a cap on how somebody expresses or vents their frustrations. So we felt we should take a critical look at how this thing was going to go before we set out, because my wish was to have the voice of the people determine how this was going to go. My wish was not to have a violent protest. So we were still thinking about this, figuring out how this thing was going to go without it, starting rioting and all that. When COVID hit, George Floyd died, and then all of a sudden, in Africa and all over the world, what we thought was going to happen on its own, even without the interfering of my art piece. For me, this showed that, yes, indeed, people really had a lot of pent-up emotions that they felt. People across the diaspora had emotions that they had things to say. And here we have I have some photos between 2019 to 2022. We have Sudan, the uprisings in Sudan. And again, this all started without even the blank slate coming in. The blank slate private viewing was in 2019. And it was inspired by protests against Confederate monuments in the US. But all over the diaspora, people had things to say. And we also had a lot of women leading these protests. In Nigeria, we had the NSAS movement, which also, so it wasn't only about America. Black people have had a lot to say on the continent and within the diaspora. In Ghana, we had our Fix the Country, Fix Yourself protest. It was mostly Fix the Country. And then the other side decided to come up with the hashtag Fix Yourself. Then there were the uprisings in Egypt as well. Then Brother George Floyd was murdered. And before we knew it, it blew up. And this photo that we are seeing, this photo says it all. It wasn't only an American thing. Black Lives Matter everywhere. And Black people had a lot to say all over the continent. All over the world, people had things to say. So before I continue, I would like to share what happened. So we did a follow-up. We felt confident. We were like, hey, people are going to do what people do anyway. People are going to say what they want to say. And so we might as well as get this thing rolling, the ball rolling. So that's exactly what we did. Hold on as I share my screen. I have this thing on another video because it won't play in PowerPoint. Okay, I got it back. So I'm going to share. This video from Harlem.
Beat production.
And it leaves you speechless for a while. Signals to me that this represents a sufferer who's praying for relief. The next thing I saw is a soldier. This is a soldier. And if we know anything about the Civil War, because we can see that that's a Union soldier, it says U.S. on his buckle. I see the sister up here with a baby on her back. I see the light in her hand, in her right hand, mind you. That says something symbolic to me, that the light, the right use of the light is going to bring humanity to a better human circumstance. She's been held up, and she's done a good job standing up and trying to take care of our children in spite of the forces that have been working against her.
So yes, we went on the road, and that video was from Harlem. We started the whole tour from Louisville. We went to through Louisville, Pittsburgh. We went to Chicago. We went to the Motown Museum. We were in a car. There were some times I was on flights. It was just an amazing experience, and it dawned on me how pent up, how constricted people felt. Like there was just so much emotion that people were sharing. At a point, it was just too much for me. Yeah, I couldn't even take it anymore. It was just words cannot even describe the experience. So how is all of this related to restorative justice? How are all these protests that we saw in the USA, the Black Lives Matter, NSAS, Fix the Country, Fix Yourself, Sudan uprisings, uprisings in Egypt? There have been so many, I can't name all of them. How is all of this linked to restorative justice? How is it restoring? How are protests restoring? How are marches, which we've seen Dr. Martin Luther King do, we've seen so many people from the civil rights era do, how is it restoring any kind of justice or peace? I would like to start by taking this quote from Double and Green, who have contributed to what has become mostly the go-to definition for restorative justice. It says it's a system of criminal justice that focuses on rehabilitation of offenders through reconciliation with victims and the community at large. So for restorative justice to happen, there needs to be an offense or a crime. There needs to be an offender, a perpetrator, and a victim, and then there needs to be a community. And the dialogue between the offender and the victim, with the aim of healing or with the aim of giving peace to the victim, is what makes up restorative justice. And in context, I would like to show when it began in the 1970s, in comparison to what was happening to African people, with the hopes that we get a clearer view, because restorative justice didn't start as something that was meant for Black people to use. It started as a means of finding, easing down tensions in the criminal justice system. It's finding peace in the communities in relation to the criminal justice system. It didn't start as something that was supposed to be was meant for healing of Black people. But at the same time, when this terminology came out, that was prior to the 1970s, when the term restorative justice came. Africans were gaining independence. The civil rights movement was going on. People were already marching and asking for their rights. We had had a pre and actual experience and post experience from the apartheid movement in South Africa as well. So if we are talking about restorative justice in the African diaspora, what do you think? What do you think is the crime that Black people are asking for, are trying to reconcile, are trying to dialogue about, in the hopes of having some peace, being restored, being healed, feeling whole again? What do you think is the crime? You can type it down. You can share it afterwards. So for me, in my work, doing Inchinchim is connected all over the world. It's trying to collect all over the world now. The aim has always been to start a dialogue that will open the journey, open people up to healing. And I feel, and I always, and I've seen it happen in 2020, 2021, seeing people get to vent using placards and writing on a blank slate monument. I feel that protest is a form of social dialogue. Protest is how people who are offended get to tell the offenders or the perpetrators that, hey, this is not cool with me. What you did hurts me. What you did puts me in a bad place, and I wish it won't happen again, because as long as you keep doing what you are going to do, I'm going to be anxious. I'm not going to feel well. And I may also start being as violent as you are. So I feel that protest is a form of dialogue. It is we talking to we. It is Black people talking to Black people, talking to white people, talking to Asians. Is a community, the world's community, starting to dialogue with itself. But if you take a look at this photo, you can see I compared the Black Lives Matters and Black protests all over the world.
Kwame, you may want to reboot the, I think the image is not showing. You may want to restart the PowerPoint.
Okay, okay. Is it working now?
Yes, you may want to go full screen.
Okay, great. So what makes a protest a social dialogue?
Sorry.
That's what I try to ask, or I want us to think as we look at these images. I believe that not every riot or protest is aimed at restoring or finding peace. So I took this in comparison. I think, and this is my personal opinion, so this is just me expressing my mind. I think, for example, the storming of the US Capitol was an interruption of what was meant to be.
The image is not showing. It was when you were not in full screen, but if you might try again. Thank you.
Okay. It may probably also be the file format. Is this showing?
You may want to just keep it without having it on full screen.
Okay. Hopefully it won't be too distracting, but does this work?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So not any kind of protest contributes to, yes, it contributes to dialogue, but not any kind of protest is a path to restoring peace. It's a path to healing. Because for the storming of the US Capitol, for example, is by comparison was an interruption of an already democratic process. I believe in my country, this has happened when people are not happy with votes. There is a proper process that you can go through to petition, to express your view, because the very act of voting itself means that your opinion is being considered, as opposed to Black people who were not allowed to vote or who were not allowed to express their frustrations, who were not allowed to enter places. Comparing the storming of the US Capitol to the work of Dr. Martin Luther King, the civil rights movement, you can see that the intent is totally different and that the conditions are totally different. These were people who didn't have human rights, who were being murdered in the streets, who continue. If I say where, it's fine. It sounds like it was in the past. Black people continue to be lynched. People who are facing racial injustice, people who are not being considered human beings. This is a totally different condition. And before I drag, I would like to move on. So the storming of the US Capitol could have gone some other way. The dialogue could have gone some other way as compared to the photos in the previous slides that I showed. The people who went on the streets felt they didn't have any other way because they were coming from a history that didn't allow them to speak, a history of not being heard, as opposed to we are all supposed to make a decision and you don't like it, and instead of following the process, you decide to take matters into your own hands. So the art of protesting can allow people to vent. And the purpose of the protest can contribute to it being a positive, it having a positive outcome, it being a positive contribution to social dialogue as opposed to just rioting. But it is very nuanced. Because where do we draw the line as to what is positive and what is negative, and who gets to speak for who? These were all the things that we were considering before going on tour. There was also, and there has always been, the matter of race. I have lots of friends who are white and have Black kids, but sometimes are not allowed to speak about the Black experience or the African-American experience. So our journey in the US was so nuanced because I haven't lived the African American experience, even though I'm Black and I'm African, and I see my brothers hurting. I have family in the US, I have friends in the US, but I haven't lived the African American experience. And despite having the good intentions about the African American experience, do I still have the right to speak about the African American experience? So these were the thoughts that was going through my head. And these are what people had to say about the African American experience. These are the words that they put up on the placard. So the placard, it's able to be logged on. It has a Wi-Fi. The whole sculpture has a Wi-Fi, and you can log on to the placard and then say whatever you want to say. And these are shots taken from, this is from Roshi from New York. I just let it stay for a bit so that I don't rush through. Michael, please check for me if it's still showing.
Not when you're full screen. It is not.
Okay. Okay. Now, the day we were in Times Square also happened to be the day for the sentences, the sentencing concerning the crime that was committed, the killing of Brother George Floyd. So it was such an experience. People had a lot to say. People had a lot to express with their bodies. We had dramas, we had performers. We had people using the placard to make references to other situations that had not received sentencing, like George Floyd's case. And this is a picture of my team. White American, non-white Americans, Blacks, gays, Caribbeans, slim people, big people, people who are into tech and not necessarily even into culture or into activism, but people who came on aboard to make this project a reality. Now, my activism or my work is not only in America, because like this topic is saying, is restorative justice across the diaspora. And while there is the American experience, we have also shared the same fate as Black people when it comes to being considered by some other people, by racists, by, yeah, mostly racist. I will just use the racist as being second-class citizens of the world. So wherever I get the opportunity, I leave a breadcrumb, I leave footprints of the bigger picture. So this is my work in STOA 169, Poland, Germany. And it says my Francophone brother. This has also got to do with protest, or what I have to say as an African on the continent about what is happening to my fellow Africans who went under French colonial rule. In my statement for this piece in Germany, I made mention of Haiti, but really it's not only about Haiti. Haiti is sharing the same fate with every country that has been colonized by France. And Ghana is surrounded by, on all sides, by countries that have been colonized by the French. I have been there, I have seen the living experience. I have seen the suffering brought about by the colonial rule and all of these conditions that is enforced on leadership in French colonies and French current former colonies. Then again, back to the US, I have worked on the outside of the memorial, the Peace and Justice Memorial in Alabama. And also on the inside, I installed, by the end of 2021, I had at least 222 life-size portraits at the Legacy Museum, all telling the same story. Back home, I got to do more because African art is never complete without a performance. And in all these experiences, I try to have a dialogue with people who are also affected by racism, racial injustice, racial inequality, and how people of the diaspora get to speak for themselves. So in Ghana, I got to do the same. Every Asafutufiam, which is the first week in August in Ada, we, the people of Ada, celebrate warriors. It's a musket firing festival, and we get to celebrate brave people and warriors who have contributed to the building of Ada, and then to the lives and the positive influence of people in Ada. So through the Inchinchim installation, which is now at Inchinchim Museum, people get to express, people get to pray. Here we have Togbi Duho II from the Volta region, praying for the enslaved, and not only for the African enslaved, but for ancestors who were taken away and never had a chance to be commemorated. For those who enjoyed my talk, who were part of my talk, Survivor Semiotics, it has always been about the experience in the diaspora. It's a Black experience, it's an African experience, but it is nuanced. Sometimes the symbols change. Sometimes what we have to talk about changes. But the experience of feeling trapped, feeling gagged, feeling that you can't breathe is always the same on either, no matter where we find ourselves as Black people. I also like to share the work of one of the contributors to August events, last year, August. That's Dr. Efusela Ejay, whose work also had a lot to say. He contributed to the unveiling of our history wall at the museum, and his work is entitled Anagrams of Time. Efo doesn't typically like to speak about his work, but this one, he likes people to look at the work and to interpret it for themselves. So I am not going to speak for Efosela, I'm going to speak for myself, interpreting his work as was contributed to Nchinchim installation, and why I invited him as a co-equal, an artist and activist who has also seen the need to vent and to protest through his art about the Black experience. So Anagrams of Time shows in the first images in 2 layers. In the first image, protest, fighting. If you can look at the silhouettes, there is black and white. And it is so integrated, this protest, this fighting in between. The only thing missing here is the blood splatter that Efo adds as a final touch to his work. The result of the dialogue, whether peaceful or violent. There's even one part that is missing when I got to see him work. He got down, I got to experience Efo work. So Efo gave us the drawing, my team and I sculpted it onto this wall. This whole wall is about 4.3 meters and high and then 100 meters long. It's a really large surface. What we are seeing now is a section of the wall. It's not a complete wall, but Efo's work was the first work to be on the wall. And he got down on his knees, he bowed down, he made a prayer. I was very fortunate to experience it. And then he made a blood, the blood spatter onto the artwork. He added that violent element in that moment, I felt the connection between him, myself, the work, and then the experience of our ancestors above, and then the experience of those of us living now, the experience of our African-American brothers as they are brutalized by the police and brutalized by vigilantes who decided to take matters into their own hands. I journeyed back to the US to continue my tour. And then when I came back, I added these works that you see, highlighting everything that you saw in the previous slides. Just for people to realize that it was and it is a global experience. The Black Lives Matter, NSAS, I Can't Breathe, Fix Yourself, Free George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. It is a global experience. It is Black people and Africans in the diaspora asking to breathe, asking to have peace, and asking to have healing. As part of the work, I also created this piece, and it shows a sister comforting a brother who has seen protest, has seen brutality. And in his hands, he holds a book, and the sister reminds him the need for knowledge and reference to our ancestors, even as we protest, the need to remember why we protest, the need to reference those who have done it before us, people like Martin Luther King, who we are commemorating with this presentation today. The other alternative choices that we have to be heard, to restore, and then to heal. Something beautiful also happened during the time of the presentation. These are two people who had not met prior to the presentation. Vice Commissioner, British High Commissioner Tom, and then Efosela had not met, yet their presentations communicated, respected each other, and in a sense show the path that we can follow should we choose to have empathy and understanding for protest. I think the Vice Commissioner saw the work before. It was the first time unveiling the work, but he had something to say about that particular aspect, the legacies of the transatlantic slavery being a part of British history that they are not proud of, or he in particular is not proud of. And in restorative justice, that is what it takes for the perpetrator or for one party to understand and see an offense and to make efforts to reconcile or to make the offended or the victim feel peace. I believe that if the world at large can have an understanding of what we can gain from restorative justice, it will contribute so much to what can be the opposite. The opposite being violence, a world torn apart, a world where people are taking matters into their own hands, a world where I decide to have freedom by whatever means possible. An eye for an eye will leave us all blind. It is really important that we understand that protest can be a path to healing, and we do it consciously, just as Dr. Martin Luther King did, non-violently, but with impact. We should understand, and those who witness it should understand, that it is a path to healing. And that should be the purpose for what we do. We shouldn't sit behind the lines and watch others do it. We should also strive to be a part of it, because if you are silent, then you are giving consent to racism. You are giving consent to police brutality. You are giving consent to violent protest as opposed to non-violent protest. I urge everyone to pick their phones, go on social media, and protest in their own way. Keep the fire burning, because racism is not something that goes to sleep. So we shouldn't also go to sleep on the matter. Thank you very much. This is the end of my presentation. Sorry about the technical error that you couldn't have this full screen, but this is what I have to say. This is what I have to share. This is what the inspiration that I got from studying the work of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, the influence that he has had on me, even not being an American. And I'm hoping that this will inspire you as well to do and to protest however and with whatever means you can. But remember to protest non-violently. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kwame. And again, to everyone, please post your questions. We have a number, and as well as kudos in the Q&A function. I wanted to start by taking you back to Atlanta last August 27th. You had known of Dr. King and Mrs. King, but you were there at the King Center, and that obviously is where Dr. and Mrs. King lay in eternal rest, and the center is a dynamic place. I just wonder what it, reflect some on being at the King Center and with Bernice King, and how that experience in real life sort of fit with what you had learned and inspired you, and what you took from that encounter with Dr. and Mrs. King and the King Center when you were there?
I must admit, meeting Dr. Bernice King was, I was a bit starstruck. And she told me how she expected me to be older. And I replied that if I have seen far, it's because I'm standing on the shoulders of a giant. So I reminded her how MLK's work has influenced me. And I also know Dr. Sela J is also quite younger than I am. But part of the experience meeting her, organizing that day, I got to realize how difficult it is for her, and how difficult it would have been for MLK to organize such a peaceful protest, because you are aiming for something, and you don't want what you're aiming for, that is your right as a human being, to be overshadowed by the platform to what you're aiming for. And by that, I mean, you don't want your quest for humanity to be overshadowed by rioting. So Dr. Bernice King was concerned about our placard. In fact, the King Center was concerned about our placard and how others can take the same platform and share, violent ideas and obscene, language and all of that. It was quite an experience. I enjoyed it, and it was also revealing for me how difficult this path is, and how difficult it would have been for Dr. Martin Luther King organizing nonviolent protests in those days, because he was trying to lead he was leading frustrated people. He was leading people who were ready to be violent on a non-violent path. Yeah.
Number of people are interested in your reflections as someone from outside the US who's gotten to know the place, both from study, but also being here. And there are a number of different questions in that regard. And so I'll offer two, and you can respond as you wish. One is to take a look at this country, at my country, which is the questioner asks, it's the oldest national democracy, but democracy here is under threat, to wit, the false stop the steal lie, the great lie, the attack on the Capitol, assaults on voting rights. So what does it look like to you? What do you think, looking at the state of democracy in the United States and what that says to you and to the world? And then another question, the questioner quotes Kwame Ture, who was born, of course, as Stokely Carmichael, who Kwame Ture noted nonviolence is just one tactic in a toolkit available to freedom fighters. And the questioner quotes Kwame Ture, and the quote is, "In order for nonviolence to work, your opponent must have a conscience. The United States has none." And so the question is, what's your reaction to that statement, that observation by Kwame Ture? So I'd offer those two as prompts for you to reflect some about the state of the United States of America today, what it looks like to you, and what the reasons for fear and hope might be.
Okay, I think that yes, U.S. democracy is under threat, but especially from racism. I think racism is stealing the innocence of kids. I have worked in the US and outside of the US. In fact, I have interacted with people outside the US and in my own country. The being articulate about racism is almost non-existent, not because these people are not smart, but they had their energies into some other subject areas, as opposed to when I met kids from Louisville at the Kentucky Center for African American Studies. You realize how incredibly articulate these children were on the subject of racism. They were living it every day, and they had to make choices about this. And children grow up like that. From their childhood, I feel they are going to be on a path to frustration. And yes, about Kwame Ture's statement, in fact, it is very similar to Malcolm X's statement that freedom by whatever means possible. It is, and what do I believe? It is true, it is the fact. It is very logical that your freedom is not for you to ask for. You must always have your freedom by whatever means possible. However, that is not the path that I choose. All these people have their choices of how they feel they should gain freedom. And I think that for me, that's not a path that I choose, because I will rather make art than to be violent. And whilst they have their opinion, I am trying to, with my art, to influence both sides, because it takes, that's why it's about restorative justice. It's not only about protest. It's about understanding that there is an offense, there is a victim, and then there is an offender. And my art tries to educate both. Yes, we, in the Black community, we are really proud to talk about for Africans by Africans. But it takes both parties, it takes all of the races to do away with racism. And I feel that it's all about context. And right now, having been given the chance, I choose to go the non-violent way. I choose to be as harsh as possible with my words, sometimes as unapologetic with my artwork. But then I also understand that war is not a win-win situation. And so even though it's one of the choices, I can only pray that it doesn't become the choice that I have to take, or anybody that I influence will have to take. If you read from the last write-up on my conclusion, I do recognize that, and it has happened in the US. I remember watching on TV a gunman going on the roof and then shooting the police. That is what we are working towards if we all decide not to be a part of this, if we all decide to stay silent. Because Black people also do have the option to be violent. Like Stokely Carmichael or Kwame Ture said, and like Malcolm X said, we also have the option to be violent, but it takes a better person and a greater person of mind and of heart to be able to choose the alternative path, which is to educate the senseless. So for the person who said that there is no mind, there is no conscience, we can make an effort to put some conscience into these people with the hopes that once they have a conscience, they will understand that peace is a choice and not a weakness. And I just always pray that I won't have to live in a world filled with racial war.
Thank you. Wanted to talk some about education and memory. In my country right now, we're in a time where state legislatures and other forces are enacting memory laws, or one might call them false memory laws, to ban certain kinds of teaching and to ban encounters with systemic racism and for looking at institutional racism, and to ignore and hide history. Your work, both in this country and at home, at your home in Ghana, and Brian Stevenson and so many others' work has been to uncover, recover, and put people back in the picture, put subjectivity. And I think of what you did with the Inchinchim installation in 2017 with the heads in Cape Coast Castle, literally embodying space and putting people's reality and humanity back in the physical space, and the importance of that. And you mentioned the young people in Louisville, and it was great to see videos of that. I wonder if you could talk some in Ghana itself, what you learned growing up about the transatlantic slave trade, what it was that inspired you to make this your work, the engagement with the legacy of the transatlantic slave trade, what sort of prompted you? It's not necessarily something that others of your generation artistically are doing to the same extent you are. I think it's fair to say that you really are a leader in this regard, but have also opened up and created space and inspired others. So I wonder if you could talk some about what you've seen in terms of education in Ghana and what you see in Ada, a museum. Your Inchinchim is a museum for sure, but in the most active teaching sense of a museum. And so in that community, what you've begun to see with young people in your teaching mission there. So if you could reflect some on your own education as it related to the legacy of the transatlantic slave trade, what prompted you to go deeper, and what you're seeing and hope for with young people in Ghana and next generations in education?
I think the scantiness of education on racial justice and racial segregation and the legacies of slavery is almost universal. It's not only in the US. In the US, I mean, we do call you the racist capital of the world. So in the US, it is felt immediately because it's an everyday thing. It's an everyday experience for Black people in the US. In Ghana and on the continent, it is a bit subtle. You ease into the realization that the world is racist and that racism is a system. And that's how I got to be educated about racism. It's an experience that you grow into. So having grown up in the 80s and the 90s, we still have that experience where you love white people, they are amazing, and then you know they are fun and they invent all these nice, beautiful things. You have been miseducated because that was what was going on at the time, and then you almost do not like the fact that you are Black. But as you grow, and you begin to accept yourself. And even if you don't, you realize you don't have a choice, and you are Black, and you're forever going to be Black. And that was going to make you second class, third class, at the bottom. And the moment you decide not to make peace with being at the bottom, you are faced with racism. And then the moment you have that awakening, there is no going back. That's what happened to me. So racism is learned. There's a lot of talk about Black people not moving on. And the fact is, we want to move on, even with people on the continent in Africa. We want to move past colonization. We want to move past all of these experiences that our ancestors had directly that we did not live. But guess what? Every time that you are ready to move on, the legacies of the trade and of the colonial experience comes back to you and reminds you that I exist, and you can never move on until the legacy is eradicated. So Black people want to move on. And what does moving on look like? When people say, hey, Black people move on, Africans move on, what does moving on look like? Moving on looks like, for me, is having a Black man walk on the streets in America without, or walk in a white neighborhood without caring about being shot. It means, for me on the continent, it means just having access to PayPal, not being considered a criminal because I use the internet. It means being able to trade online. It means traveling freely across, a lot of borders without considering that you're Black. But then what happens? The legacies of the trade blocks you and reminds you that there was a condition that the world has subscribed to that is not letting you move on. So for as long as a Black man cannot walk freely, then the legacies of the trade are blocking him or her. So it is not us who don't want to move on. It is the racists who don't want to move on. It is the people who are enjoying the privilege of having their ancestors enslave others who don't want to move on. And it is them who are now afraid. They are protecting the system that they benefit from. And they wish that it remains the same. They wish that the children don't learn. So curricula all over the world don't have enough of the history. They don't talk enough about racism. We have a lot of Africans who are not even prepared to be on the world stage. We all start up with dreams until we realize that you can't be the next best artist until you've showed in the West. You can't be the best doctor, you can't be the best actor until the West approves for you. So what gives them the power to approve? The system that allows this to happen is the legacy. And as long as the legacy of the trade, which is a consciousness, we cannot move on. So that's my experience, especially in relation to education.
Great. Two questions before we close, drawing again from comments and questions from the audience. And one is reflects on you chose or were chosen by the world and the spirits to be a sculptor. So talk about that medium, which is a very public medium. Obviously, your works are engaged by broad audiences, not just gallerists. And then also, so if you just talk some about the meaning of sculpture to you, why you chose sculpture, or why you think it chose you, and its importance, and then in a general sense. And then Ed Hamilton is someone who New Haveners and folks at Yale who know New Haven adore. He has done two works of freedom fighters, two great sculptures here, the Amistad Memorial outside City Hall that commemorates Sengbe Pie, and the other of the Amistad uprising, as well as the monument to the freedom fighters of the Civil War of Connecticut's Black soldiers who fought in the Civil War. So Mr. Hamilton is someone who is much admired here as well as throughout this country in the work he's done. And you had encounters with him in Louisville, and I wonder if you could talk some about your sense of his work and what might be coming. I don't want to give anything away, but I wonder if you could talk some about Ed Hamilton, since New Haven knows his work well, and you've come to know his work well. So if you might just reflect some on sculpture as a medium and its meaning to you and what you think it means for the world, and then talk a little bit about Ed Hamilton and perhaps, if you're willing, what we might see in future times.
Meeting Ed was like meeting my hero, and especially with the way he paid me respect, because when I met him at the Kentucky Center for the African American Studies, he knelt on one hand and then he said, "Peace be on you, brother." And in my culture, you can't have your elder kneel before you, so I had to go down on both knees and you know, pay respects back. I met a lot of activists on my tour in the US, and in a way, I think that I felt relieved that not only were people doing such great things, but there were people who've done it so much. I had so much, I was so inspired. People seeing Ed, his age, the energy, and then the enthusiasm made me lose a lot of anxiety that I had at the beginning of the trip, because this is a man who was dedicated almost all of his life and his work to telling the Black experience and history, the African American experience, which is what I'm doing for the African diaspora. And so it was just great meeting him, and then all these other activists that I met, learning from their experience. He also invited me to his studio, by the way, and I got to see his process. I asked him to be my mentor. He felt like I don't need an artistic mentor, a creative mentor, but I wanted to learn from him as an artivist, someone who has used his art and who has lived in an age which was more violent, relatively more violent than I do. And in relation to projects in the future, we are in talks to have a collaboration in Ghana in 2023 or maybe 2024. So we don't know how that will look like yet, but there's definitely going to be some sort of collaboration between me and him, and then between the Nchinchi Museum and the Kentucky Center for African American Studies. So yeah, you should look out for that.
Exciting. Two questions. One that just came in. So you asked people to say what they thought the crime was that restorative justice was required to address. And among the things people said with crime in the chat, just to share and raise up what people had said, colonization, white supremacy, loss of self-agency and one's freedom, loss of identity, which weakens a society, need healing from the Jim Crow South. So those were some of the responses, of the many responses that people had to your prompt. And one of our audience members has asked that you answer your question. So you asked, what was the crime? What do you think the crime is that demands restorative justice?
The crime has many names. It has many forms, and it has many experiences. But generally, when you look at all the protests that we are having, the crime is on degrading the human experience in all of its forms. So emotionally, spiritually, socially, that has been the crime. The crime has been causing trauma and the continuous effort. For me, as somebody living in this time, the crime is not only what is past, it's what continues to happen. So if the legacy did not live on, if racism did not continue, if George Floyd had not been murdered in the streets like so many other people, if Black people who look like me in the US and Europe were not experiencing racism, then I might as well have been reading about the Black experience, the transatlantic slave trade, as I would have read about the Dark Ages, as I would have read about the Roman War. It's past. It happened to some people and it didn't matter. But it is a crime if we continue to hold it and to keep it in existence. And I think that is the biggest crime of all. So upon the colonization, is a new colonization that is a crime to me. These experiences, they happened to my ancestors. It could have been eradicated. We could have moved on to a new age, but we have systems that have been created to keep us all from evolving, from moving on to a new age, from finding the peace, for actually having restorative justice and having healing. And that is the biggest crime of all. Anything that is happening in this time that is preventing us from having healing is the biggest crime of all to me. Yeah.
Thank you. I've posted in the chat the link for next week's Mondays at Beinecke. For those of you who this is the first time, every Monday we have a speaker on some topic drawing from the collections and the archives. Next week, our dear colleague Melissa Barton, curator of prose and drama in the Yale Collection of American Literature and the James Weldon Johnson Memorial Collection of African American Arts and Letters, will be speaking on Brava, Women Make American Theater, which will be an overview of a new exhibition Melissa has curated on women in American theater from the collections in the Beinecke Library. So I encourage you to join us if you're able to next Monday, and you can find on the Beinecke Library website, beinecke.library.yale.edu, more events that will be upcoming, including an art and protest series that links very much to the topic of today's talk, with speakers coming up talking about art and protest in Hungary. The extraordinary American artist Dred Scott will be speaking in February, so please look at the Beinecke website, subscribe to our email newsletter and our social media for other talks that will be coming up. Kwame, thank you so much for today. And I wonder if you could just reflect some, you've been in Beinecke Library and we hope to have you again in the library. You do work yourself with memory and archives in terms of the sculpting of the thousands of heads in the Inchinchim installation. It's both live models, but also looking at archival documents and resources and drawings. And I wonder if you could just reflect some about the role and importance of libraries and archives, both to your practice as well as to the world, and just reflect some on this day about archives and libraries.
Yeah, archives mean everything to the work that I'm doing, and it's been so great to be able to fact check and then to have your guidance and the resources at the Beinecke Library on what I do. I think that my work for me is has a spiritual path or a spiritual aspect to it, and being able to come to the Beinecke Library and holding the portraits of the enslaved on the Amistad, being able to look at the posters from the Black Panther, being the Black Panther protest, being able to hold in my hands W.E.B. Du Bois's actual letters, and it's that moment when you look at the image, and I'm going to take this from the personal perspective before I talk about the importance at large. Holding them and seeing his thoughts, reading his words, reading what he was thinking, his experience, and looking at the ink on the paper, the scribbles, it's just an amazing experience. And in that moment, you feel that the library is a museum of itself, is a museum of the minds of our ancestors. It's a museum of the experiences of our ancestors. It's divine, and it's like a holy place. The archive is like a holy place. You can literally tap into the past and live it and know how to avoid such circumstances in the future. It's great. And on the importance, it is everything. I would like to give an example of what happened, xenophobia in South Africa, when we have some South African brothers attacking some other Nigerian brothers, forgetting that during the time of the apartheid, the brothers and sisters in Nigeria, government workers, donated part of their salary to in support of the freedom struggle in South Africa. Were these other brothers, South African brothers, attacking the Nigerians in full knowledge of what had happened, then maybe we would have had a totally different experience. Maybe there could have been collaboration, knowing that the Nigerian brothers had helped them in the past. They could have, met these people and then maybe found some other ways of venting their frustrations. But it didn't happen because probably they didn't have access to this history. That is how important history, libraries, archives, and museums are to our current sanity and our current evolution as humans, as spiritual beings. Yeah.
Well, and that is a good reminder as we close of the importance of the tangible, of the actual, of the real. We're living in a Zoom world and a world of virtual reality, but it is essential that we hold on to and go back to and preserve the tangible and the real. And you are such an extraordinary artist of reality and of having us see reality. I encourage everyone to do whatever you can to engage with Kwame's work. You can see it, as you know, in the United States, in Montgomery, Alabama. Anyone who has any opportunity in Ghana to go to Ada, whether you're Ghanaian or from the outside and visiting, it is impossible for words to convey what Kwame and his colleagues have built in Ada fully. It needs to be experienced. It's more than 100 acres and truly an amazing reality that you've created there that continues to grow month after month, year after year. So Thank you for being with us in 2 dimensions on a small screen today, Kwame. We look forward to seeing you in the United States again as soon as possible. And we pray sometime again in New Haven and at Yale. And I will allow you for the final word if you have any words of benediction, as the chat and Q&A is filling up with many, many thanks for you for taking the time for sharing your thoughts and work with us today. But the screen is yours for any final benediction or call to action you might want to make.
Yep. I would just like to reiterate on the importance of protest and our right to protest and the purpose for protesting. I want to urge you to go on social media and share my work, share not only my work, but the works of other people who are fighting for our sanity and our peace. People like that, share Ed Hamilton's work, share Efusele's work. We also do need encouragement, because sometimes it feels like you're on a lonely path. So it is not, just as with the Blank Slate Monument, it's not my story alone to tell. The Black experience is not Kwame Akoto's experience. The African experience is not mine alone. It is our shared experience, and that includes people of all races, because the human condition is an interaction between all of these races, and there's so much beauty that can happen. But then there's so much beauty that is being blocked by racism. And it is our responsibility, everybody here today, to make sure that we do move towards a brighter future. So go ahead and be an activist in person, and then with your phones and on social media. Keep safe, and see you again next time.
Thank you again. The chat is full of many thanks and multiple exclamation points for you, Kwame, and for what you've done for us today. And in the words of another great Kwame, ensuring that we can keep our sights set so that we move forward ever, backwards never. Have a great day. Thank you.